Mary Magdalene knew something that the church spent centuries trying to make you forget. And it starts with a question nobody in Sunday school ever asked you. Why the right hand? Why across almost every institutional religion on earth is the right hand the one raised in blessing, the one placed on the holy book, the one pressed together in prayer? Why is the right hand the one that confers authority, that seals vows, that touches the sacred? And why, if you dig into the actual etymology, does the word sinister mean left? That's not a coincidence. That's not linguistics drifting by accident over centuries. That is a worldview encoded into language so deeply that most people never even think to question it. You've been using the word sinister your whole life without realizing it was originally just a direction. Left. That's all it meant. Left. Someone decided left was dangerous. Someone decided left needed to be associated with darkness, with weakness, with the devil's side. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because when you follow that decision back through history, it leads somewhere very specific. It leads to a suppression. And at the center of that suppression is Mary, a woman whose teachings on this exact subject were considered so threatening, so destabilizing to institutional power, that they had to be not just removed, but inverted. She knew something about the left hand, and what she knew would change the way you pray forever. Language is never neutral, especially not spiritual language. The word dexter, which gives us dexterity, skill, capability, means right. The word sinister means left. In Roman augury, the direction a bird flew from determined fate. Right was favorable. Left was an omen. But here's what most people miss. This wasn't just Roman superstition randomly absorbed into Christian practice. This was a deliberate theological architecture. The early institutional church didn't stumble into right-hand dominance. It chose it. It chose it because the mystical tradition it was suppressing, the tradition Mary carried, had assigned the left a meaning that was the opposite of sinister. In the sacred feminine lineages of the ancient Levant, in the pre-Christian mystical streams that Mary moved within, the left side was the receptive channel, the lunar side, the side connected to interior knowing rather than exterior performance. The left hand didn't grasp. It opened. It received. And there it is. That's the threat. A path of direct reception, of knowing God not through an intermediary, not through a priest or a ritual or an authorized channel, but through your own inner faculty. That is the single most dangerous idea any institution can face. So they didn't just remove the teaching. They poisoned the symbol. They took the very hand that represented inner reception and called it the devil's hand. That's not accidental erasure. That's a precision operation. This is the part that genuinely unsettles me. Not that they disagreed with Mary's teaching, but that they understood it well enough to know exactly which symbol to corrupt. Before the church standardized anything, there was a living current. A transmission that moved from teacher to student, not in written doctrine, but in direct encounter. Mary was part of that current, not a footnote in it, a primary carrier of it, and her teaching about spiritual perception wasn't abstract philosophy. It was viscerally practical. It was about how you actually approach the divine, what posture, what inner orientation, what quality of attention you bring. Picture this. It is sometime after the events that shattered and reformed her world. She is sitting with a small circle of students, not in a synagogue, not in a formal setting, but in the intimacy of a gathered few who are hungry for something real. And she isn't teaching them doctrine. She isn't reciting law. She is teaching them how to perceive. She speaks about two modes of knowing, one that reaches outward, that projects, that declares, that asserts its understanding into the world, and one that opens inward, that stills itself, that makes itself available, that receives rather than produces. She maps these not as opposites, but as a pair. Two hands. Both yours. Both necessary. But one of them, she says, most people never learn to use. And that one, the interior, receptive, silent one, that is where Gnosis actually lives. Gnosis. That word matters. It doesn't mean information. It doesn't mean belief. It means direct knowing. Not knowing about God. Knowing as the place where God enters. What strikes me most about this teaching is how completely it was flipped. The receptive mode, the open palm, the listening interior, the left, was reframed as passive, as weak, as femininely suspect. When in truth it was the advanced practice, the harder discipline, because silence is harder than speaking. Receiving is harder than asserting. Opening is harder than grasping. The right-hand tradition gave you a spiritual life of projection. Mary was teaching the other half of it. 325 AD. The Council of Nicaea. You probably know this moment, but most people think of it as a theological debate. Which version of Christ's nature would become official doctrine? That's true, but underneath the theology was a deeper contest. It was a contest over who gets to be the channel. The mystical feminine stream, the current Mary represented, taught a path of direct inner experience. Unmediated, personal, interior. You, alone, in the posture of reception, encountering the sacred without a gatekeeper. That model is impossible to institutionalize. You cannot build a hierarchy around it. You cannot enforce tithing from someone who hears God directly in their own left-handed silence. The right-hand model solved that problem beautifully. The priest raises his right hand. He confers blessing. He mediates. He stands between you and the sacred, and his right hand is the authorized cable through which grace officially travels. The left, the direct, interior, self-sovereign channel, gets named Sinister. Dangerous. Associated with folk practice, with women, with the uncredentialed and the uncontrolled. Origen of Alexandria, one of the most dazzling theological minds the early church ever produced, a man who read scripture in 6 languages simultaneously and wrote more than any other early Christian writer, taught about the soul's 2 poles of perception, an outer-facing pole and an inner-facing pole. He taught that real spiritual transformation happened at the interior pole, not the exterior one. He was later condemned. Some of his teachings were declared heretical, and what he described maps almost perfectly onto what Mary's tradition taught about left and right as modes of consciousness. I'll be honest with you, when I first understood the timeline of these suppressions, when I saw how consistently, how precisely, the interior receptive teaching kept getting cut off at the root across centuries, it wasn't shocking. It was just deeply sad, because it means generation after generation of sincere seekers were handed a half-circuit and told it was the whole thing. Here is what the tradition actually preserved of Mary's psychology of spiritual perception. The soul, she taught, has layers, not floors in a building, more like frequencies. The outermost layer is the analytical, projecting, world-facing mode. It organizes. It speaks. It performs. It is the part of you that can explain your belief to someone else. That layer has its function, but it cannot touch Gnosis. It can only describe Gnosis from outside. The inner layers, particularly what she described as the deepest seat of perception, operate differently. They do not project. They resonate. They recognize. When the divine moves, these inner layers feel it the way a tuning fork feels a matching frequency, not by reasoning toward it, but by vibrating in response to it. The left side of this teaching, the receptive channel, is how you access those inner layers. Not through effort, through release, through the deliberate laying down of the projecting mode and the opening of the receiving one. This is exactly what Meister Eckhart, the 14th century Dominican mystic who came terrifyingly close to being burned for his teachings, called Gelassenheit. The letting go. The receptive emptiness that makes room for God to actually move in you rather than just be talked about by you. He didn't cite Mary. He couldn't, historically. But the current is the same. The transmission found its way through different vessels across different centuries. So why would anyone suppress the harder, deeper, more liberating path? Because the harder path makes you free. And free people are ungovernable. Mary's teaching was never disembodied. This is important. The mystical streams she moved in did not treat the body as a problem to be transcended. They treated it as a map. The left side of the body, in the Egyptian healing traditions that preceded her, in the sacred feminine lineages of her region, was understood as the feminine, lunar, receptive channel. Not lesser, not weaker, differently purposed. The left ear listens more deeply. The left eye sees more symbolically. The left hand, held open, was understood in mystery school initiations as literally creating a condition of receptivity in the initiate's energy field. The laying on of the left hand was not about conferring rank. It was about opening perception. The teacher's left hand on the student's left shoulder, or held palm to palm in the left-hand grip, was a transmission not of authority, but of sensitivity, of attunement, of activating the student's own interior channel rather than loading them with someone else's doctrine. The right hand in that same tradition transmitted will, intent, direction. Also necessary, also sacred, but a different function entirely. This is where I think modern spirituality, even the progressive, church-free kind, still gets it fundamentally wrong. We are still, most of us, operating inside the church's framework even when we think we've completely left it. We still perform our spirituality. We still speak it outward. We still reach and declare and project. And we wonder why it feels like we're knocking on a door that won't open. The door opens from the other direction, from the left. When you raise your right hand in prayer, when you press your right palm together, when you gesture rightward in blessing, you are in projection mode. You are speaking at the divine, asserting, declaring, transmitting outward. And I want to be precise here, that is not wrong. Intention matters. Well, matters. The projecting mode has its sacred function. But if it is the only mode you have ever been taught, then you have been given half a spiritual life and presented it as the whole thing. The right is the doing. It is petition, declaration, the active movement of prayer. The left is the being. It is the still, interior, available quality that makes reception possible. Mary's tradition was not anti-right. It was not about inverting the hierarchy and simply calling the left superior. That would just be the same error with different branding. It was about wholeness, about the understanding that you cannot only speak in a conversation. You must also listen. And the listening faculty, the spiritual ear, the receptive interior, the left-hand channel, that requires cultivation. It requires practice. It requires you to become comfortable in a kind of sacred silence that the projecting mode finds deeply uncomfortable because it cannot perform in silence. The tradition asked you to pray with both hands. One speaking, one listening, one projecting intent, one receiving response. And here is the part that the institution truly did not want you to understand. The response comes when you actually open the left channel, when you actually cultivate receptivity rather than just petition. The silence answers back. Not in words always, in resonance, in the tuning fork vibration of your deepest inner layer recognizing something it already knew. That recognition is Gnosis. That is what Mary was teaching. And that is exactly what was buried. What the lineage preserved, in fragments, encoded transmissions, in practices that survived inside other traditions the way seeds survive inside stone, was something called a bilateral practice. Not left versus right. Left and right in conscious, deliberate relationship. The right hand holds the intention, the specific, clear, directed prayer, what you are asking, what you are offering, what you are committing to. That goes in the right. Project it clearly. Then you stop, and the left hand opens. Palm upward, body still. The projecting mode quieted. No more speaking. No more performing. No more explaining to God what God should do. Just openness. The left palm as a literal and symbolic act of availability. I have spoken. Now I receive. This is not passivity. This is the hardest spiritual discipline there is. Because the mind will immediately want to fill the silence with more projection. More asking. More doing. Sitting in the open left stillness, genuinely available for response rather than manufacturing one. That is the advanced practice. That is what Mary's tradition called the way of interior knowing. You can see echoes of this, barely preserved, in the Hesychast tradition of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Mystics like Gregory Palamas, the 14th century Archbishop of Thessaloniki, who defended the practice of inner silent prayer against those who said God could only be reached through external ritual. He described an inner light, a direct perception available to the soul in stillness. He was nearly condemned for it. What he was defending was a ghost of the bilateral teaching. Thinned out, stripped of its feminine origin, but recognizably the same transmission. Mary's teaching didn't disappear. It went underground. It found new containers. It survived in the spaces between official doctrines, in the practices of mystics who were tolerated at the edges of institutions that didn't fully understand what they were carrying. When I sit with this, I feel the weight of what was taken, not stolen dramatically, not in one violent moment, just quietly removed, reframed, renamed, given a sinister label and left at the side of the road. Before I leave you with the final piece of this, I need to say something directly to you. YouTube demonetized this channel. They flagged this work. And I want you to feel the irony of that for just a second, because the same force that buried Mary Magdalene's teaching didn't use fire and swords. It used systems, institutions, quiet mechanisms of control that make sure certain knowledge never reaches enough people to matter. They tried to stop her. They're trying to stop this. I need to be honest with you. Without your support, this mission cannot stay alive. It is that simple. I cannot fight this war alone. I'm not stopping. Instead, I am doubling down. But I cannot keep going without you. If you want access to what they genuinely don't want you to find, the deeper teachings, the forbidden blueprints, the private community where this conversation goes further than any algorithm will allow. Join me on Patreon. The link is in the description. That space exists because some knowledge was never meant to be gatekept. Not by the church, not by a platform. Come find what they've been trying to hide. You are not at the beginning of something. You are in the middle of a recovery. Across the world right now, people are returning to interior practice, to silence as a spiritual discipline, to receptivity not as weakness, but as the most sophisticated form of spiritual attention there is. That movement has many names and many entry points, but its deepest root is this, the teaching that Mary carried, the bilateral knowing, the open left palm after the spoken right-hand prayer. This is where the tradition is going next. Not back to a romanticized past, forward into a wholeness that was always the destination, a spiritual life that doesn't just speak at the sacred, but actually develops the capacity to hear back. The mystics who kept this alive across centuries knew what they were holding. They held it at personal cost, in margins of institutions that wanted it gone, in practices that looked harmless enough to survive. Now it is yours to carry forward, not as belief, not as information, as practice, as the deliberate daily cultivation of the left-hand channel, the receptive interior, alongside whatever prayer tradition you already hold. Speak your prayer with conviction. Mean every word of it, then open your left hand, and wait. That waiting, that quality of available interior stillness, that is not the absence of prayer. That is its completion. That is what she taught. That is what they couldn't afford for you to know. Now you know it. What you do with it is entirely, sovereignly yours.